We are recording. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mr. Teacher, Mr. Preacher podcast and YouTube channel. I am the teacher. I'm Kevin. That's Jake. He is our preacher in residence. And we are here to learn a little bit more about what lasts in athletics and teach and preach it back to you, the coach, primarily athletes, parents, anybody that really is looking for an autotelic experience. Today, we are after self-control. We are on to a new block, Jake. We've covered the entire bottom row of John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, and now we're moving to that second level. I feel like we've made it a long ways looking back. We're going to that second level. We're looking at self-control. We will define that as we go forward here, and really looking at what can we control? What is worth controlling? How do we go about that? So we have things today such as the Bull Durham respect test, the best test, the opponent that can contain Michael Jordan. I know that seems a little bit crazy, but the opponent that contained Michael Jordan, and so much more, including things like coffins, control, banquets, battles, bluffs, breaks, and everything in between. So it's going to be a great time looking at Ryan Holiday's Discipline is Destiny. But Jake, I'm going to turn it to you. Bless this episode for us about self-control in all things, physically, mentally, spiritually, and in athletics and otherwise, because Lord knows we could use some self-control these days.
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, thank you for another glorious day, sun coming up, and another hopeful night of rest and a new day of new beginnings and new possibilities. I pray that you would bless this time. Just thank you so much for Kevin, his wisdom and his thirst for knowledge that you have put in his heart. I thank you for our audience. We're also seeking wisdom and discernment and understanding. And I thank you for the ability to talk about self-control and the ability to develop discipline to gain self-control. Lord knows we all need help with that, whether it's from above, whether it's from a neighbor. We thank you for the communities that you have put in our life to keep us accountable and to help us along this journey. For all these things in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. If you're new, we follow a structure, deeper reading model. So reading books, pulling out lessons. We follow Kelly Gallagher's, he's a famous writing teacher out in California, deeper reading model. So we start off and we focus the reader. So we're in this concept of self-control. And Jake, I wanted to start out with another puzzler of a question of who's your Cato? Now I'm going to build to that. Okay. So who's your Cato? And they're like, you're dudes, you're talking about athletics and you're some stoic philosopher. Yes, we are. So what I mean here is somebody who you've truly marveled at it doesn't have to be in the athletic world necessarily, but we'll stay there. But somebody in the end, it says in the beginning here, what endures, what we truly marvel at, according to Ryan Holiday, is not the ambition, but the self-mastery. So like we say, okay, somebody achieved something cool. Most people get that, right? Like you won the thing. But what we really marvel at is the self-mastery, the self-awareness, the temperance, the control of self. He goes on a page later. He said that name someone truly great without self-discipline. Not possible. Name one calamitous undoing that was not, at least in part, rooted in a lack of self-discipline. More than talent, life is about temperament and temperance. And so late in the book, this was a fun find, is mentioned Cato. And Cato was this individual that was looked up to by a number of famous people. And so this is what it says. Some 100 years after Cato's death. So Cato lived this life of a Stoic, let's just say. Seneca advised that we should all choose ourselves a Cato, a ruler to measure ourselves against. Now, I don't usually advise comparing yourself to anybody, but like somebody to aspire to, right? That's kind of what I'm looking at. A model to inspire us to be what we're capable of being. When Nero's goons came to kill Seneca, he drew on Cato's example for strength in the last moments of his life. Some 1700 years after that, George Washington would model his entire life on Cato's example, choosing his famous mantra from the mouth of his hero. The two men had never met Cato, but he made them stronger. His discipline stiffened their spine when it counted. To reach your destiny will require such a hero. So, Jake, that's where I want to start. Could be body, could be mind, could be soul. But talk to me about somebody who's your Cato. So as an athlete, or even as a coach, you can kind of take this wherever you want it, but somebody you've marveled at, who had that self-mastery in some domain, you're like, that's awesome. What's been that to you?
Knowing it personally, it's tough. One thing that so Mark Wahlberg has a schedule apparently that's ridiculous. Like the guy's getting up at like 4:30 every day. Or I know you listen to like these guys like Jocko Willing, like, I get up at 4:30 and whatever. And some of it's like, well, yeah, I don't go to bed till 10:30, but I wake up at 4:30. I'm not capable of functioning on that little of sleep. So there are humans who can do that. I think Elon Musk functions on about 3 hours of sleep every night or something ridiculous. But I know Wahlberg was one that I heard was interesting. I was like, that's sweet. I wish I could do that. I mean, I probably can. But getting up at 4:30, getting a workout in, getting breakfast, getting another workout in, and then it's like 7 o'clock finally. And it's a guy that could easily, with the money that he's made, lay in bed till 11 o'clock without a care or worry in the world. And then maybe one that I more intimately know is probably my wife. It's pretty amazing to me to consistently put the needs of others above herself. And to have such discipline doing so. Like, no, dinner has to get made, house has to get clean. Some may find that preposterous. If I told her that, she'd probably find it preposterous too. But like for me, I just don't have the willpower to do those things. I look at the floor plenty of times and be like, nah, I can do it later. But she never does that, right? She's constantly disciplined enough to always take care of other people. Like, it's mind-blowing to me. She probably doesn't look at it that way, but to me, it's certainly something that I marvel at. To always be willing to put yourself second for your family is certainly something to marvel at.
Well said. I've seen Wahlberg's schedule, and I don't even know if I could do it for a day. Like, because I've seen him train too. Like, I mean, there's video evidence. Like, it's not like a mystery. Now, granted, he does have it all right there. I mean, it's at his house, and doesn't make it easier. Who knew we were a romance channel, Jake? Because I'm just trying to like picture this as a coach. Like I'm gonna say I'm a dad. I'm a coach. Like, hey, free advice. Like, I'm just talking to a coach with a spouse. Okay, walk up to your spouse and say the most romantic thing you can say with like all the compassion and like just I don't know how you want it, but to add it really heavy. Say it slow, honey. You're my Kate. You're my Cato. You know,
my Cato, baby.
Would that land? I mean, is that foreplay? God dang! Like, I mean, I don't think that would work. But you know,
I don't think it would land. No,
I don't know unless you read the book. You know, I'll go the athletic realm here and go a little bit different. So when I was a middle schooler, my uncle got married to my aunt Harumi. My aunt Harumi's Japanese. So when this wedding happened, her entire family came over. Now, this is exactly when, dates me a little bit, Ichiro came to the United States. So he was all the rage. All right. And I've had a long fascination of Japanese, East Asian culture, just honor, ritual, orderliness. I mean, like if you look at American or Western baseball versus Japanese baseball, I would love Japanese baseball. I mean, like they just vibe with me. The point of this is like in the Cato conversation is Ichiro played a long stinking time between his career in Japan and the career in the MLB. And he is not a big dude. I mean, when you think professional athlete and you look at Ichiro, those do not necessarily equate. I'm doing funny hand motions here if you're not watching on YouTube. And so I've always been fascinated with routines. So books like Daily Rituals by Mason Curry, which is hilarious because how people perform in like the great aspects and how quirky they are, like to be able to pull off their things. Like it humanizes these great people and how flawed they are. Not everybody is Mark Wahlberg, and nor do you have to be. Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss, Tribe and Mentors. I love seeing how people do the things they do. So to Ichiro, he had his own like weight machines, very specific, that he would do every single day, like a certain amount of reps that did stability and range of motion, and you can watch him do it. They're very cool. He was hyper mobile, like just worked on his flexibility, and like you watch him warm up. He was very famous for his like on deck, routine. I am the opposite of that. I am a bull in a china shop. I am short, stocky. I got probably more muscle, less flexibility, and the antithesis of Ichiro. So that's probably why it was the lure, is like, wow, look at how this guy did this. And he not only could hit, he could run, he could hit for power. He threw stinking 90 plus miles an hour, even at 40 plus years old. So it's fun to have people like this, not necessarily Cato. I mean, you could have Cato if you want, that you look up to, you aspire to, and say, do I have Ichiro's, not necessarily his routine specifically, but discipline? Do I have Tom Brady's thirst for improvement? Do I have, and they become something that we can say, not to compare to denigrate us, but to aspire to. I mean, because if Washington and Seneca are doing it, I think it's good enough for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Ichiro, 5'11", 175, debuted at the age of 27 and still managed to amass 3,000 hits.
Never going to happen again.
He was one of a kind.
One of a kind. I'm going to have to look that up again because I've seen it before, and I still, like, those machines, they're kind of hard to track down. It's always fun to try out people's routines too. So I know you said you couldn't do Wahlberg's, just even staring at it. It still is fun to try out people's routines. I think like there was a series, I know we're reading Ryan Holiday, like This Is How I Work. I love those because, you kind of like throw yourself like, hey, I'm kind of like that, or nah, I couldn't do that.
For fun, since we're on it, if you take in his Japanese stats, he had 573 professional hits.
5,000?
573 professional hits. A career 322 average.
Jeez.
If you take his 9 seasons playing in Japan too.
Good Lord.
That's pretty ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. So you need self-control, people, in order to pull this off. So let's transition to that. First draft reading. How do we develop self-control like that? How do we aspire to something? What are we aspiring to? So in our self-control series, Wooden defines this as practicing self-discipline and keeping emotions under control. We will get to emotions, just not primarily in this book. 2 other books are much better for that. Good judgment and common sense are essential. So this book is about that good judgment, common sense holistically. So Ryan Holiday is writing this series about the 4 cardinal virtues. We've got courage. That was Courageous Calling. That was book 1. This is book 2, which is called Discipline is Destiny, the Power of Self-Control. How fitting of a book to do when we're studying self-control. And the 3rd one's going to be on justice, and the 4th wisdom, just so I can complete that. So this is the sequel to Courageous Calling. It is a book. Let me read in Ryan's words.
Hold on.
I
said it. Hold on. I said it, and it sounded so wrong. I was looking at the wrong column. 4,367. Lest I sound like a knucklehead saying that he had 573 hits. He had 573 doubles.
There we go.
There's next to it, 4,367. Okay, continue.
He's the true hit king. I don't, and we're not even debating. I love Pete Rose. So first draft reading, what we're looking at is comprehension. What are we up to in self-control? And this book's aim is really about helping us choose temperance, self-control, moderation, composure, balance. That's where we need to live. And it's good to hear those words. So Ryan breaks this book down into 3 big categories or themes called the exterior. So that's the body. So we're looking at the physical realm of self-control. The second is the inner domain, which is your temperament. I like to say like the cognitive or mental, the inner game. And then lastly is the magisterial, which is the soul. So kind of this deeper spiritual thing. And then he wrote subtopics underneath that. So you were looking anywhere from 12 to 18 mini chapters that go with it. And as Ryan does in any of his books, highly recommended. Obstacle is the Way. We did Ego is the Enemy a bit back. He's very well researched. You know, he draws from different eras, from different arenas. So he gets lots of really good stories. And that's why this episode's going to be the way it is. So this book is, just to finish off a couple of things, and then I'll pass Jake if he has anything to add before we move into our deeper topics. I usually don't say a book is for everybody, but this book literally is for everybody. And Ryan even says it. This is a book about, you know, everybody benefits from self-discipline and self-control. Life is not fair. Gifts are not handed out evenly. Reality of this inequity is that most of us coming from a disadvantage have to be even more disciplined to have a chance. Jake's not big, neither am I. So what? You know, like you gotta work with what you got. They have to work harder. They have less room for error. So this is a book really for everybody. What I do want to add here is, what is self-discipline according to Ryan? All right. So self-discipline, the virtue of temperance, is even more important. It's ability to keep your butt in line. So this is what this means. The ability to work hard, to say no, to practice good habits and set boundaries, to train and to prepare, to ignore temptations and provocations. That one's hard. Both of those. To keep your emotions in check, to endure painful difficulties. Self-discipline is giving everything you have and knowing what to hold back. So it's about balance. Temperance defined is not, this is key, deprivation, but command of oneself, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Demanding the best of oneself, especially when no one is looking, even when allowed less. It takes courage to live a life of self-control. And not just because it's hard, but because it sets you apart. I knew you'd love that. I wrote that down. It sets you apart. Going on with that, talks about greatness. What is greatness and the idea of self-control? I'll pause and give you a second here. Is later in the middle of the book, we have to understand greatness is not just what one does, but also what one refuses to do. I think we get into this. We're learning about a lot of stuff. It's like, oh yeah, do this, do this, do this. But what about the opposite of don't do that, don't do that, don't do that? I think a not to do list is just as powerful as the to-do list. Makes your life way simpler. Yep, I don't do that. Okay? So there's a lot that comes with it. We'll get into it. The other thing I want to acknowledge, even though I hinted at it in that quote, is that discipline and self-control is not a punishment. So I want our coaches, and even if you're an athlete, to understand, like, this is not like a burden, like, oh, you know, there's rules and you're just controlling me, like, you know, like a parent would with their kids, having, you know, rules and expectations, like, hey, I need you to have a curfew, for instance. So I want to read this. Discipline is not a punishment. It's a way to avoid punishment. We do it because why? We love ourselves. We value ourselves and what we do. Lastly, before we jump into our major topics, is way at the end of the book, is we talk about cultivation and control. So why are we doing this whole thing? Why are we self-controlling? We are here trying to actually get better. Today, tomorrow, and every moment. Every minute, get better. Self-discipline is not something that just happens to you. It is something you cultivate. It just doesn't fall out of the sky. Being disciplined is something you prove by the life you lead. Lastly, we have a choice. We choose between self-control and ill discipline, virtue and vice. It's whatever wolf you feed. So, Jake, that's what this book is about. What's anything stand out to you from that comprehension, just basic level self-control as it pertains either to life or to athletics?
I thought the very interesting word that you used is it's not deprivation. I think almost everything of what you said really reveals self-discipline in a much different light than we tend to think of it. Mm-hmm. And I won't even say self-discipline. I'll say discipline. Self-discipline is one thing, but when I'm thinking as a child getting disciplined by parents, okay, quote unquote, we view it as a very negative thing on that, which that's not a standing point. It's trying to get them to avoid discipline in the future. That has much bigger consequences, right? That's what we have. We're playing the long game here, not the short game, and that's not always seen by kids. But then if we don't grow up and mature in that way, we might not see it as adults as well. But deprivation was interesting. It's not because I was about you said emotion, so then I was about to say, well, okay, but we still can have emotion. Being self-disciplined doesn't mean you don't have an emotion, right? That would be deprivation. It just means you know how to control it, right? You know how to funnel it. You know how to process what you are feeling, and not in an outburst that everyone looks at, well, that person's out of control, right? So the deprivation thing stuck out to me because we're not depriving ourselves of maybe we're not depriving ourselves of something. We're learning to control ourselves around something, which I think is a very key distinction.
Yeah, and one of the exercises that I'm going to kind of parallel here, I agree with this, and I want to ask you a question off it because I didn't actually have it, is we had the PERMA model of happiness. And so instead of imagining it was a scale. So PERMA is the happiness model from Martin Seligman: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So what you can do as an assessment is you can kind of shade in those 5 areas, kind of think like a graph. And you can say, well, I'm a 5 at positive emotion, I'm a 10 at meaning, I'm a 4 on accomplishment. You can kind of do this, you know, it can be shaped in a unique way. I want to ask you about that. So when you hear these 3 areas, just for the sake of this book, you hear about the body, you hear about the temperament, you hear about the soul. Which of those are you know, like, I'm not asking you to assess yourself necessarily, but as an athlete or a coach, which one of those was kind of like, yeah, that one kind of came a little bit easier to me, like I was able to, grab hold of that? Which one was like harder to, like, it was constant challenge? I'll speak for myself. You know, I had a high degree of perfectionism, so the temperament was very hard for me, especially with failure. I didn't get a lot of help around the because I put a lot of time in, and the pressure would outweigh the pleasure in that context, as it's been said. So I really struggle with the emotional ups and downs of being attached to outcome, right? Because I wanted it really badly. I wanted to be good. I wanted to win. So I really struggled with that. You know, and when you're a teenager, your emotions are already out of whack anyways, and you catastrophize to wit's end. I didn't initially struggle with the body. Now I don't. Like, I love that stuff. Just get your sleep, all, you know, working out. I love that. It comes very naturally to me now. And the soul is one I'm just always constantly intrigued by. Not that I'm good at it necessarily, but I resonate with those principles and I try. So I guess if you made me kind of triangulate these, the ones I would need most growth with would have been and have been temperament, body came easy, and the soul is just kind of neutral. How about you?
You know, up until what you have just laid out in terms of self, I would have said that mentally what came easiest. But that was deprivation. It wasn't self-control.
Ooh.
Which I think ultimately held me back because I got rid of the emotion. I did not process it. When I was younger, I did to a degree. Like, I would get mad if someone crossed me, and I was able to funnel that into appropriate energy on the field. But then it turned into such a stoicism. You just taught, I got to be level-headed, got to be level-headed, which, yes, but there's a caveat to that. You have to be level-headed, but that doesn't mean you get rid of the emotion that takes you through the up and down. It means you learn how to handle the emotion of going through the up and down. And so I think I was largely just devoid of any emotion in that regard. And then you throw in the competitive side of me, which cares very much. And to this day, I struggle playing games. I now have self-control not to do it because I am aware that once I get into it, I might not have the self-control to carry myself in a way to get through whatever thing we're doing. So that's why people go, oh, why don't you play games? Like, I just don't feel like it. And deep down, I'm like, if I get into it, it's not going to reflect well on me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get. I'm started playing Rocket League with my kids.
Okay.
And it's so hard not to trash talk even the little kids. So I do, but I try to do it in a much more playful way, and then they start
Yeah.
beating me and do it back. I'm like, "Yeah, stinking annoying," and
Mhm.
then mom gets upset because dad can't turn the game off
Yep.
because I have to finish on a win. Like I
Yep.
can't. You want me to end the game by losing to this 10-year-old? Are you kidding me right now? It's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
No chance. So that one I would have said came easy, but I think honestly it came easy just because I didn't deal with it.
Okay.
Physically was never an issue. I just loved and enjoyed it so much, right?
Mhm.
The doing of the activity. And then soul, that's an interesting one for me to wrap my head around from a secular point of view. I'm really I would be curious to hear much more from a secular point of view on that than
It,
where I come from.
and I'll define these as we go. So as we move forward, we'll go to the second draft. Second draft is where we dig into specific things about the book. Sometimes we go point by point. It depends on the book. And other times I give Jake the choice. We're not trying to cover all of the book. That's probably my weakness in book coverage is I like to talk about everything. We don't have time for everything. So we're trying to pick out the key things that apply to us. So we are going to go section by section. So here's how it's going to go. We're going to start with the body. I'm going to define that. We're all on the same page, very simply. Cover a few topics. We'll go to temperament or the inner domain. That'll be a pick and preach series. So I got A, B, and C, and then we got the soul. So I'll define that, and we just got 2 sets there. Some things to draw out. Some are more lofty principles. Others are more practical. We got a little bit of both today. Some books are very, very tactical. Do A, do B, do C. This one's a little bit of both. So let's move into that. The body. Let's start with the body, and let's define what the body really means. I like that. Yeah, the body. Oh man, I haven't heard that name in a long time. He's got to look. So he's talking about here, Ryan. He's like in St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. We're told to keep the body. We're told to keep under the body and bring it into subjugation so that we will not be made a castaway. Yeah, so I thought that was an interesting way to start this. But he says it's not about 6-pack abs or the avoidance of all that feels good, but instead about developing the fortitude required for the path we have chosen. To me, what he's describing, at least through in the corresponding chapters, is a foundation so you can actually do the thing you want to do. It's like not self-sabotaging. So you can't live fast and live hard and still expect to wake up the next day and actually be able to do your thing. Like or if you try to do that, you're now subjugating yourself to a lesser performance just by default. So it says instead about developing the fortitude for the path we chose, if we don't dominate ourselves physically, who and what does dominate? That's a good question. Outside forces, laziness, adversity, entropy, atrophy, fancy words. Dominate your desires is what I wrote down. So that's where he's defining that. And he quotes Martha Graham, our body is our glory, our hazard, and our care. So I want to start, Jake, with the Yankees. And I don't like the Yankees, but I do like history. Yeah. With a contrast between Lou Gehrig, Jake, and Babe Ruth. And I wish we could cover the entire chapter on Lou Gehrig, but we are not going to. I want you to hear what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. And I think we need to see this as coaches and especially as an athlete. So Lou Gehrig was not born an athlete. He made himself into one. Kind of like Teddy Roosevelt, had asthma and then he made himself the strenuous life. Gehrig worked harder than anyone. Fitness was almost a religion to him, according to a teammate. All right. So what I want to point out is that there were players with more talent, with more personality, more brilliance, but nobody outworked. Nobody cared more about conditioning. Nobody loved the game more than Gehrig. And everybody says that, right? Gehrig has the resume to back it up. So he couldn't pass up the opportunity to play. He cultivated the strength, the habit of not listening to his emotions. Because once you start compromising, well, now you're compromised. So what he did was he had this thing. He wasn't a square. He said he had an obligation to be a champion and to act like a champion. He wasn't a drinker. He didn't chase girls or thrills or drive fast cars, but he was no good time Charlie. And at the same time, he said, I'm not a preacher and a saint. Continuing onward, Gehrig was fully ready to admit that his discipline meant he missed out. Let me repeat that. He missed out on a few pleasures. He also knew that those that live the fast or the easy life miss something too. This hurts more. They fail to fully realize their own potential. Gehrig also famously almost took to drinking. If you didn't know, he was going through a big slump, and he had a drink before a game, and it kind of took him out of his own head, and he had a good game, and a coach stopped him and said, you're not going to like where that road ends. So Gehrig really developed this discipline and didn't have a good example for a parent, and so he almost did the opposite. He didn't drink, chew, or smoke. He was in bed by 9:30 or 10 each night. When a man can control his life, Muhammad Ali says, his physical needs, his lower self, he elevates himself. So that's our archetype of Gehrig. I would say he is the archetype of discipline. I want you to contrast that real quick, Jake, and tell me if you've ever heard of this before, with our friend Babe Ruth. Now, Babe Ruth is not Lou Gehrig. He's in the next chapter about attacking or about the strenuous life. And I'll read it, and I liked Babe Ruth a lot. I mean, he was a fun character, but there's a point here. Contrast Gehrig with Babe Ruth. Take a look at the diet of Babe Ruth as he played alongside Lou Gehrig. Breakfast was a pint of whiskey mixed with ginger ale, then steak, 4 eggs, fried potatoes, and a pot of coffee. For an afternoon snack, it was 4 hot dogs, each washed down with a bottle of Coca-Cola. He had an early supper and a late supper, each the same. 2 porterhouse steaks, 2 heads of lettuce drenched with blue cheese dressing, 2 platefuls of cottage fried potatoes, and then 2 apple pies. Oh, and between the 2 suppers, he had 4 more hot dogs and 4 more bottles of Coca-Cola. Perhaps all that needs to be said is that Ruth was once rushed to the hospital for drinking too much soda and eating too many hot dogs. It was fun while it went down, but the aftertaste was bitter. Listen, Lou, Babe once told Gehrig, don't be a sap. Keep in condition. Don't let yourself get soft. I made a lot of mistakes when I was coming along. I didn't eat right and I didn't live right. Later, I had to pay for all those mistakes. I don't want you to do the same thing. Babe Ruth's athletic feats, then, as inspiring as they are, carry with them a tinge of sadness. What could Babe Ruth have accomplished had he been more disciplined? What greatness did he leave on the table? Because, yes, even the greats could have been greater. What stands out to you? I mean, I see so many athletes who have talent, and maybe this is probably one of the things that drive me nuts because I didn't have a lot of that. I didn't come easily. Leave it on the table. They succeed in spite of themselves. So I'm much more drawn to Gehrig than I am to Ruth. It's a sad story. Both stories are pretty sad, but like this idea of Ruth versus Gehrig, and how we all have these athletic alibis and excuses, and discipline really comes down to controlling what you can. And I realize that it's not as sexy, it's not as fun, or it doesn't appear to be that way, but it's way more fulfilling. So anything stand out to you about Ruth versus Gehrig besides the fact that you can end up in a hospital for drinking too much Coke and hot dogs? Not that kind of Coke. Coca-Cola.
It is a conundrum that I find myself in quite often. Who is widely considered the best baseball player to ever live? Babe Ruth.
Ruth, yeah.
It's not Lou Gehrig. How did Lou Gehrig's story end? At this point, he is most famous for an incurable disease that is miserable, that slowly zaps the life out of you. Some would say probably one of the worst ways that you could meet your end in this world. So why does the guy who had no self-discipline, didn't care what he put into his body, considered the best baseball player to ever live, to have lore and a cult following, really, nicknames that you can't even imagine, a movie that's nearly all about him that us 90 kids grew up loving.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who was disciplined meets a slow, painful end. Considered a great baseball player, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Not nearly the level of Babe. If that is the end, why would I care, practice, live out discipline in my life? You're telling me I can have the pleasures of Babe Ruth and still be considered the best baseball player of all time? Or you're telling me I could have the discipline of a Lou Gehrig and end up 6 feet under after a brutal, brutal death? Which one would you pick?
That in
And
that
why?
in that context, I think Ruth kind of even got added, or even Holiday afterwards. Like when you get done, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, Jake, about athletes transitioning out of professional sports and how. Do you remember Pilgrim's Progress? I mean, I think we read it in third grade. Mrs. Kowalczyk, is that how you say it?
Call
Damn,
check. Yep.
Kowalczyk.
Second most purchased book, I think, of all time, behind the Bible.
Do you remember the phase where Christian is carrying that weight and then it falls off? Remember that visual?
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think every athlete carries this baggage, this weight, this sin, whatever, in Pilgrim's Progress terms, that there's a grieving period as you transition like out of athletics into the real world. Like when you're done with your professional days, I think, and Daniel Pink talks about in The Power of Regret, how small can you make that regret? You're going to have some, right? I mean, you wish this, you wish that. I think Gehrig went out with a smile. He got everything he could out of it. Whereas Ruth, because it's not, I know we did Cato in the beginning, but Ruth, we don't know what Ruth could have done. So which, and I fully appreciate your building of that. To me, it's like, how small can I make that weight of regret at the end of this? That I got everything I possibly could have. You're still going to have something. That's human. Regret is human, just like any other emotion. But to minimize and lean more towards Gehrig than to Ruth. And so it doesn't matter necessarily the outcome, but that your process was as pure and as good as it could have been. Because then you can leave without regret. You're like, hey, I did all I could. Maybe it didn't shake out how I wanted it to, but I still put everything I could into that.
I think the most powerful statement in what you read of that story was Babe's comment to Lou.
Yeah.
And I think we have to understand that discipline, it's not for the fans. Man, is that alluring, but it's fleeting.
Yep.
Because Babe Ruth may have filled my head with wonder. He may have created a story and history that is one that's mesmerizing to me. He has a legacy and a lore that's incredible for me, a fan. But what was left in his heart at the end of all that?
Mm-hmm.
What did he have to trade away? There's always a trade-off, right? And I think you're spot on. There's always the what could have been. Well, what if I didn't have to? What if I didn't have to go to the emergency room because I ate too many hot dogs and soda pops? Like how many more home runs could I have hit if I actually, cared with what I was doing, or truly put forth my best effort in every area of my life? But for me, it comes back to the question of who am I performing for?
Yep.
Am I performing for the fans? Am I performing for myself? Am I performing for my parents? That question needs to be answered, because you'll find much different motivations behind them. And I think the motivations create either gaps or fill gaps in your mind, body, and soul as time goes along.
Yeah, and some are what is it, like this difference between a cylinder and colander? Like, like the spaghetti strainers where they have holes in them. The more you put it in, the more it just falls out. Versus if you fill those holes, then it goes upwards. It's a good visual. So what can we sweat about? So let's use that. So when it comes to the body, what I wrote down is sweat the small, sweat the show. And these are two things like what can we control? So the details of the body. And Holiday does mention and sweat the small stuff, and which is a play on the words of like don't sweat the small stuff from that book series. But what I wrote down is he goes into John Wooden's description of putting on socks. Why did he do that? This is how you put your shoes and socks on, man, was what Wooden said. Is he's like the little details are by far the most important. We think of like these grand things you need to do every day, right? But it's the small things. What he didn't want is he didn't want blisters, right? And if you don't have blisters, it means you can play better. And so he was working on the small details, which also appeared in a number of other books on industriousness. We're fit to tackle the big problems only if we do the little things first. Zelda Fitzgerald, this was a sweet quote. It is the loose ends, she lamented, with which men hang themselves. I'm like, that was good. But what I'm trying to say for the body is like greatness is in the details. Details require self-discipline. And they talk about for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. And what Ryan said is because of a blister, the game was lost. For want of the socks, the championship was lost. So it's, drinking 16 ounces of water when you wake up doesn't seem like it's a big thing. But it is if you're dehydrated and now you're in the fourth quarter. So it's stuff like that. So sweat the small things. And then the show comes a little bit it comes under the chapter of just show up. Showing up, the incredible underrated power of clocking every day and putting your butt in the seat. This is where luck seems to be. Show up and try. Get on the treadmill. Pick up the violin. Answer some emails. Script out some scenes. Reach out to clients. Read some reports. Lift a couple weights. Cross one thing off your to-do list. Jog 1 mile. Show up when you're tired, when you don't have to, even if you have excuse, even if you're busy, even if you won't be recognized for it, even if it's been kicking your butt lately. Is it still hard? Yes. What most people don't know is that, or what most people don't do is they just don't show up. They can't even do one tiny thing a day. You're the only one responding on Christmas. I disagree with that. Consistency is a superpower, is what Ryan says. The most important thing a scout told Lou Gehrig is a young ball player can learn is that he can't be good every day. You don't always have to be amazing. You do always have to show up. What matters is sticking around for the next at-bat. This is the first step to greatness. One thing a day adds up, and each day adds up. So what do we focus on with the body? My point of that is sweat the small, do the minuscule atomic things like we learned from James Clear, and sweat the show, which means show up. Detach from where it goes that day, because some days it might go far and some days it may not. Just over the course of a season, you're not going to have a good day every day, and that's okay. So do you have any small details or anything on just showing up?
I tend to hate that moniker, just show up. I'm going to be honest with you. Like
I do too.
I feel like it's kind of overplayed and no, not just show up. No, you have to put forth your best effort. Now you can be understanding that it's not always going to be your best effort. There's going to be days, obviously, that aren't. But just you just got to show up. Like, well, no, if I just showed up to my classrooms, I would have flunked every one of my classes because I would have played some computer game, but I was there. No, that one drives me nuts a little bit. I do get the point though. I would say more consistently show up. I think if I had to summarize what you said, it would be, consistently do the small details. Consistently pay attention to the small details because they add up and they matter.
Yep.
Right. And that is one of the hardest. It is a very hard thing to get your body to do, and in your brain too, right? Your brain's going to tell you, that's not a big deal. There's a small thing. It's not a big deal. You don't have to do that today. And I think that's more what it's getting at. No, I do have to do it today. I have to show up today and do that, no matter how small the detail is. Since you opened the door on the Apostle Paul, Um,
I knew it would come back.
it brings me back to Romans 7, which a friend of mine has affectionately referred to as the doo-doo passage, and I call it the doo-doo passage all the time now. The reason it's called the doo-doo passage is because that which I will to do, I do not do. And that which I will not to do, I do. And then he goes on to explain that. Therefore, then, I find a law that is present within my members, within my body, right? That is warring against the law of my mind. And so Paul's identifying this disconnect between what our body wants to do and what our brain wants to do.
Yep.
And that is the epitome of discipline to me. Those two things have to match. There has to be one that overrides the other, always.
Yep.
Which one's overriding? Is it the one that says, nah, it's just a small detail, we don't have to pay attention? Or is it one that says, nope, this has to be done today. I don't care how small it is. I have to do this today. Mm-hmm. So even if you're sitting there like, the Bible's Bible, it is a concept that carries into life that I think we all can identify with. There is this thing inside of us, this voice inside of us that's constantly like, yeah, you don't really have to do that. And It's this constant battle going on. Like, no, I should do that. Even just scrolling your phone at night. I really don't need to do this.
Yeah.
But then there's another part of it, but who cares? Right. Yep. It's just a little thing.
Well, and a few things. I love the doo-doo passage. You're gonna have to write that one up. I totally like that. I like that. Is a few things. Is I have the Whoop strap. Jake and I have talked about Whoop and Aura, and among other things. But one thing that's in Whoop is like the red recovery days, like the red days. So you're in the red, yellow, green, meaning you didn't. I mean, I did sleep almost 8 hours last night, so I did get a pretty significant amount, but I'm still not recovered for whatever reason, right? And you could deconstruct that. But and what I want to say is, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you have a 2 that day, you give as much of your 2 as you got. And I don't want to say you do less, but like, if that's what you got, you give what you got, and know that number is going to go up and down. And some days you're going to feel great, and you can push and push and push. You push as much as your 2 will give you. And just being honest with that gives you a much more realistic thing. One of the things that exercise people have tried to do is say, don't skip the workout, just reduce the scale. So instead of doing the 5 sets, maybe do just 3 or 2. Another one was even simpler than that. It's like, hey, don't worry about doing the whole workout. Just do the first exercise. Just show up for 2 minutes and then you can leave. I remember hearing that over and over. I did Joseph Pilates, his contrology, his exercises for 31 days straight once. And all I told myself the whole time, because there's some days I didn't want to do it. I'm like, I have to do the same sequence again. I just did the 100, which was the first one. As soon as I did the first one, like that was the win. Like when I changed the win to I finished the 100, that made me win. I did the whole rest of it. I'm like, well, I'm already here. I'm in my workout clothes. Might as well do the other ones. Mm-hmm. It took 15 more minutes, whatever. But when you change the scale of the win, it really, really does matter. And I do agree with that. Finding those small details of your sport and picking them very specifically and saying this thing. And you don't have to do every small detail. That's one thing I wish people would let go of, is like, don't sweat every detail. Like, not everything can be socks. Choose your socks. You know what I mean? Like, really choose your socks. It gets so overwhelming to remember every single thing. But if you choose them well, it can trickle to the other things. It becomes a habit, a way of thinking. So, all right, let's move to hustling. So hustle. There's 3 things that go with hustle. Hustle slowly, hustle repetitively, and hustle eagerly. So to repeat, how do we hustle? We hustle for our body slowly, we hustle repetitively, and we hustle eagerly. So this was one of the questions that came up. It said, if you're not a person who hustles, who are you? And I find that entertaining. If you're not a person who hustles, who are you? So let's go about these different types of hustling. So slow down to go faster. Festina lente, as I think the phrase that Ryan uses here, it says make haste slowly. Discipline pacing. Cal Newport's coming out with a book called Slow Productivity. Be in it for the long haul. I know we want to get somewhere. We want to get somewhere fast, and there is something to be said for sprinting. But slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Do it right and it goes quickly. Try to go too quickly and it won't go right. So get your pacing down. In addition to that, in the next chapter, it says practice, then practice more. It has been said that master swordsman, I'm going to mess up the name, the Nakayama Hakudo would practice drawing his sword some 2,000 times a day. I don't care what sport you're in. Do you swing your bat 2,000 times a day? I know Ichiro swing a lot. There was a phrase from Musashi, the samurai, training from morning to night. Chotan Seki-ren. Seki, S-E-K-I, Ren. I don't know how to say that. He says, okay, oh, you've done that? Okay, do it some more. And after that, more. So having that kind of talent code counter where you have that, like those 1,000 pennies or beads or marbles, whatever, in a jar. There's no greatness without practice. Lots of practice, repetitive practice, exhausting, bone-crunching, soul-crushing practice. You got to love the practice. Lastly, we had slowly, we had repetitively, and eagerly. I like this one. It's one thing to this is our antithesis to just showing up, but eagerly. If you do it right, it's also torture not to do it. So if you are doing a physical practice and you want to show, like, do your athletes really like going to practice? I mean, that should be like one of the barometers, temperature gauges. The sled dog gets anxious if it doesn't get to wear its harness. The horse wants to go out and trot. The bee dies if cut off from the hive. When you find what you're meant to do and you've designed it correctly in an environment that's fun, you do it. Always and forever, the reward is the work. So hustle, Jake. Slowly, repetitively, eagerly. What do you like?
Slowly, repetitive, eagerly. I think what comes to mind is instant gratification and how much that is at war with discipline. It is one of the key enemies, man. And oh my goodness, as culture, do we live on that dopamine hit all of the time. And you know, I think there's so many things in culture that makes it so hard to be disciplined. So much harder than probably any other time in life, quite frankly, just because there's so many distractions. There's so many things that are instantaneous now with the growth of technology the way it has. So everything you said to me was screaming instant gratification. This is what it all is. Instant gratification. Well, I showed up. Why don't I have anything? What's going on? Why am I not better? You know, the amount of times like, well, he started out as the third best kid on the team, and now he's the sixth best kid on the team. You suck as a coach. It's like, well, just because he shows up and doesn't mean he's going to just also be the best. Like everyone else is also doing that. What is your logic that he's going to be the third best player for the rest of his life? Like, what are we doing here? What are we talking about?
As a 12-year-old.
As a 12-year-old. Things go up and down, right? It's a grind. That's why it is discipline, man, because it's not easy. And you don't see the payoff right away. If you did, you wouldn't need discipline.
Yeah.
So that's what all of that screamed to me. And it's one of the things in our society that we are really at war with as individuals, trying to overcome that constant instant gratification society that we have found ourselves in, and wishing that it applied to everything in life.
I'll admit that in some areas of my life, I can rep it out with I love reps. Hitting off a tee, like when you find what you're meant to do, hitting off a tee, I just like the sound off of a wood bat. It feels so good when it goes. Posting daily on social media, I hate that game kind of thing, right? You know, so like there is a game, and yes, I need more reps at that. But like sometimes, you know, and there's a way to figure that out. But some things are much easier, I'll acknowledge. And so it's like, okay, how did I get that? How do I bring that over here? Is not some things do directly transferable skills, transferable mindset, transferable whatever. Sometimes they don't. And so it's like, okay, well, how can I make that look more like the thing that I did before? That was kind of my push for the gameful mindset and saying, okay, what games do you like to play? How can we translate that to your work, to your life, to your next thing? But I agree with you. The instant gratification is a huge uphill battle because we have this. This is why I saw as an English teacher, kids didn't have the muscle to sit and read for 5 minutes. they needed, to, what are you doing over there? And so you had to start really stinking small. Hey, we're only reading for 5 minutes. Yeah, shut up. The timer's on the board. And then you had to slowly work that way up. And then ideally you'd get to a class where, on a free reading day, you would have 20 to 30 minutes. But that is not a muscle that just, because everything screams at us, like you were saying, like, here's your notification, here's your 10-second TikTok clip. How many people can realistically listen to us for 2 hours kind of thing? Right? I prefer long form podcasts, long form things, but that didn't just happen overnight. I like to see where a conversation would go. I wanted to get to know that guest on that show. I wanted to hear how that interviewer asked those questions to get somewhere that nobody else has gone. So yeah, we are working on that, but those are the facts. So what? Then train it out of them. It's not like it's like, oh, there's no point in trying. Yeah, no, there is a point in trying. If everybody's going that way, then maybe we should go the other one. So I think you just have to be realistic in the beginning that you're not going to just be able to get them to do the thing the way you want them to do it in the end. It's going to take some time. So
yeah, and in awareness of it, I would say the thing that I'm coming to a realization of is that we are really the last generation to know what it's like without technology in our face all of the time.
yeah.
Right? Those who were born after us, all of a sudden the cell phone was in their pocket by the age of like 10, kind of deal. Computers were everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. There used to be a time where, like, for me, I love researching and looking into biblical interpretation and things of that nature. Well, I can get a TikTok that'll break down Daniel 9 for me in 30 seconds with a quippy headline, right? But back in the day, that used to be a book. That used to be citing a significant amount of resources. That used to be showing a deep level of understanding and expertise. But now, kids have had technology their whole life. They think that is research.
Yeah.
They think that is really potentially reliable information without understanding that that's not how it used to be. People used to gain knowledge by reading books, by reading articles where things were laid out on a much deeper level than they are now.
Well, and don't get me wrong, because as I record this, I do everything by hand at this point. So in theory, guys, like, I'll be honest, I'm very interested in using like Chat GPT to make our YouTube scripts and to give me just questions without reading the actual book. I write the scripts by hand, because it helps with memory. Writing is better than other things. So I'm very interested in that. But, I'm trying to hold that tension. Like, books bring me joy. So why would I take the easy way and lose all the richness? Because I'm having to choose, what do we talk about? What do we write down? And the same thing happens with athletics. It's like, don't take the easy way out. There's actually, how much pride there is when you've done those 2,000 repetitions a day and you step into the arena and you're like, I've swung this. I think that's one of the things we're missing about the anxiety, performance anxiety, is the confidence that comes from the repetition, from the time put in. And don't get me wrong, there's a place for AI. I mean, I'm not against this kind of thing, but it still needs to have its place. There is still something to doing things the hard way, the long way. There's lessons there that you can't get. And I do think there's a point for speed, but I agree with you. Last one on the body, and then we'll kind of hustle through these other ones here. I want to ask you, Jake. So we talk in flow coaching about the different types of grit, not just one type of grit. And I want to ask you, which one do you struggle with more? Do you struggle more, or do you succeed more? Either way, you can interpret it how you want. Do you struggle more with the grit to suffer or the grit to recover? So I struggle with the grit to recover, to sleep. And I'm going to get to the point here after you answer. The suffering doesn't bother me as much. In fact, I've traditionally gone overboard on the suffering. The whole get your sleep, drink your water, less is more, is kind of where my brain's at been the last year or so. Is like, don't go for as much as possible. Go for as much as you need to do to get the desired outcome. Really 80-20. That's why I like minimalism, essentialism, all the isms of those arenas. So grit to suffer or grit to recover? What's been your go-to?
Neither one. I would say grit to recover.
Okay.
Comes more natural, and I'm getting into it now. My wife is slowly beating me into the realization of how much healthier and more disciplined I can be or could be in the body realm, for sure. And so the easiest step of that is getting your water in, eating the right things, stretching. I need to stretch today. Oh my goodness. So I had to go the recovery route.
I should send you in the mail the ball of torture, those rad rollers, those little like two lacrosse balls. Those things are like, you want to talk about mean? Like, it's not if it will destroy you, it's just where. So and so I want to say on this is, like, when we talk about self-control, you need to seek discomfort. That's the chapter. We covered the comfort's crisis. I think it was our first book. But the point of this is going out of your way, having the discipline to be a little bit uncomfortable, because that's how, using that sword analogy, is how you temper a sword. You expose it briefly to heat and cold, to environments that tack the steel and harden it. Joel Runyon of Impossible HQ, he's also the guy who made the app CST, cold shower therapy. He said there's really two types of people: those that take cold showers and those that don't. And that's his litmus test for people. It's like my other favorite litmus test, which we should really have made a whole section about, is people who return their carts to the cart stall and those who don't. Like a functioning society, like, we don't have to go to cold showers, although I do take those. If you don't return your shopping cart to the cart stall, this is everything wrong. Like that, if like besides making your bed, put your cart back. That's it. Okay. So W. Du Bois said, take a cold bath bravely, make yourself do unpleasant things so as to gain the upper hand of your soul. That's a good quote. But in addition to that, the grit to recover. So burnout and injuries are way more expensive than time off. And there was this whole section about Greg Popovich deliberately doing that, like, load management, which is a whole another topic. But he was playing the long game. And what we're talking about is, when you're committed to something, sometimes the harder choice, the greater exercise in restraint, is to rest. Like, you do need to rest sometimes. We're in this for a career. We're going to be on this grind for decades. We're in this for life. We need the grit to recover. Yes, our work is important. Yes, we hustle. Yes, our drive is how we become successful. Our love of the game is what got us here. But without the ability to rein it in, we will not last. And to wrap that up a couple pages later, Ryan does a good job of his chapter title. Sleep is an act of character. Really cool. So the idea of sleep discipline. James Stavridis, he was a 4-star admiral in the 90s, Persian Gulf. Watching our physical health, he said, is an act of character and can enormously help with our ability to perform. My pithy, there's two pithy acronyms I wanna give people. One is GTFB, go to F in bed. Like, just go to bed. Like, you don't need a routine. Just go to bed. Like, don't tell me about, like, how you meditate and then you do this and then you journal and that. No, just go to bed. Go to bed. And then the other one, which I was not aware of. Have you heard of the HALT acronym from addiction circles, Jake?
No.
All right. Tell me which one that would trip you up. I can tell you the one I would get. It's called HALT, HALT. Hungry, angry, lonely, and tired.
Yeah.
So most people get tripped up when they're hangry, angry, lonely, so like connection, intimacy, whatever it would be, or just plain tired. Like, you're out of willpower, you're on empty. I guess tired gets me the most. When I'm out of willpower, like, I'm done for the day. I just, like, the couch, there's a magnet on my butt. I don't want to talk. I don't want to make a decision. No, the dishes are fine where they're at.
Absolutely.
I guess the tired, like, angry that pops up periodically. Lonely, I'm around people all the time. Hungry doesn't bother. I've done that one. So, okay.
No. Okay. Tired definitely gets me the most there. Hungry, I think it's hilarious. That's my kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to start implementing that with my kids. I'm just going to halt. just to make them aware of where they're at. Halt.
Well, it's good to, then we don't take things as much as a character thing. It's like, no, you're just these things.
Yep.
So which brings us to temperament. So we're going to do these a little quicker. This is a pick and preach time, Jake. So I'm going to give you 3 things from the book. This is about temperament. And temperament is our second section. It's about the inner domain. I want to define that. It's very, very simply, what man is happy? He who has a healthy body, resourceful mind, and a docile nature. That's Thales. True self-control means moderation, not just in what we do, that was the body, but also how we think, how we feel, how we comport ourselves in a world of chaos and confusion. Temperament is everything. Our head and heart combine to form a kind of command system that rules all over our lives. So how do we do that? So this is where, like before, is a little bit philosophical. This is a little more practical. So the first set, we have the pause, the no, and the deafening. What was the word that ends in that scary movie? Not the Reckoning. What scary movie am I think of?
I don't know.
No,
I strike you as a guy who's big into horror movies.
No, but that's like not the Reckoning, not the Haunting. I don't know. Whatever. Somebody will correct me. But the pause. The first thing is the pause. So having the self-control to pause. So George Washington was the guy who was actually very hot-tempered. It's in the chapter of Look at Everything Like This. He said the pause is everything. So that kind of, space between stimulus and response. So before you respond, and is just to pause before you jump to conclusions, prejudge, assume the worst. You can make yourself that way where you can just literally pause, rushing to solve your children's problems for them, forcing a problem into some kind of box, assigning blame, taking offense, turning away fear. We pause, we gather ourselves, we put it up to the light. I've seen it on social media quite a bit. It's like giving 3 seconds before anything. That's a long time. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. One strategy, really low hanging fruit, the pause. The second one is the no. So keep the main thing. The main thing is the chapter is that if you're after something, you need to control and say no to some other things. What is the main thing? What is your priority? The secret to success in almost all fields is large, uninterrupted block of time. If you say yes to something, it means you have to say no to something else. You're going to miss out. And that's okay. You can't say yes to everybody. E.B. White, one of my favorite quotes here was, I must decline, he said, to some sort of request for secret reasons. So when you hear a lot of successful people, what they'll start saying is learning how to say no to others, especially when you're trying to help, but you can only help so much because once it starts taking away, I know some authors have said, yeah, I got, just good at responding to emails. Like I was responding to emails more than I was ever writing. So number 1 is the pause. Number 2 is the no. And then the next one is the deafening. And I just was trying to be playful with this is, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it pays and it helps to be a little deaf. So in the context of this is fighting provocation. Yeah. Like if a guy is chirping at you in the stands or something, like you just pretend you don't hear it. So you think of Jackie Robinson was featured in this is just don't engage. When we fight, we are complicit. We have chosen to engage. We have traded self-control for self-indulgence. Life, people, they're going to give you the opportunity. You can choose to decline to accept it. So we have the pause, the no, and the deafening. Page 123, flow follows focus. So the self-control to focus, that goes a lot with some of our other learnings, is that we really need to be having the mental discipline. As Steve Jobs says, how many things have you said no to? You need to sit down and get into that raptus, your flow state. Eliminate distractions, intense focus on a singular point, just like the magnifying glass, heating up on a single point. The last one I want to offer to you is perfectly cowardly. It's a good one. Perfectionism is a vice, is the chapter. And I found this one interesting. Perfectionism is paralysis. That's the way you spell it. It doesn't matter the cause, whether it was procrastination or perfectionism, the result is the same. You didn't do it. Not trying because you're not sure you can win. You're not sure whether everyone will love it. There's a word for that too. Cowardice. We have to be brave enough to soldier on. So of those, the pause, the no, the deafening, focusing, or letting go of perfectionism to actually do something, what helps you most when you think of the mind? What do we most need in sports? What do we most need as people?
I think the deafening is a big one, a huge one. That's probably the one that stuck out most to me. You know, I'll share a story that kind of goes along with this. I was at a game, an assistant coach. The opposing coach started yelling at the referee, to which caused him to start responding to the other coach.
Oh.
And then that just was a slow buildup. And so I let him go for like a minute. Nah, it wasn't a minute. It felt like a minute. There's no way it was a minute. Before I looked at him, and I just said, "Would you be quiet and just let him be an a-hole?" That's what I said. You don't have to join him in the a-holery. You just let him go. Let him be him. Like, you don't. Why are we engaging in this? And he kind of looked at me, and I think he was a little bit shocked that I actually told him that. But then he was like, "Okay, I suppose that makes sense." Like, if I have to step in to protect a referee, that's one thing. But I'm not gonna engage in the tomfoolery of someone else. I'm just gonna pretend like I don't hear it. Essentially, kind of a deal. The other thing that helps me, and this is how I articulate it, is with my emotions, is simply setting realistic expectations. For example, with a referee, and I think I've used this before, but I don't show up to any soccer field or any sporting event expecting the referee to be perfect. And maybe this goes into the perfection category as well, right?
Yeah.
So when the referee makes a wrong call, he hasn't broken my expectation, therefore my emotions don't get flared up. Okay, quite frankly, and I don't mean this as a diss, this is more of a self-control issue. This is more of a self-control practice for me, not an attack on any referee. I expect the referee to suck every time I show up to the field.
Correct.
So when the call goes horribly wrong, I just kind of go, okay. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, young kid, okay, whatever, right? I'm not expectations set behaviors in a lot of ways. So I'm very careful to set what my behaviors are, or set what my expectations are as a coach. That goes into every training session. What are my expectations of my players in this given session? Am I expecting them to make every pass perfect? Am I expecting them to make every decision the right one? Or am I expecting them to be focused? Am I expecting them to pay attention? Am I expecting them to give a high work rate? Yes. So when you don't give that high work rate, that's where you're going to see an emotional response from me.
Yep.
When you make that wrong decision, that's when you're going to see a tempered response. You're going to see questions. You're going to see guidance. There's no guidance that needs to happen. There's no long drawn out guidance that needs to happen when you're not working right, working hard. This needs to be an immediate fix. So my emotions are going to kick in because this is a basic expectation. So that is for me how I control my temperament as a coach. A lot of it just has to do with expectations. And a lot of it has to do with just pretending like I don't hear what I'm hearing.
As much as, because we grew up in a really cool era of power forward centers and NBA basketball players, pithy phrase. We got all sorts of pithy phrases today. Doo-doo passage, halt, GTFP, go to, Tim don't tomfoolery. Remember Tim Duncan?
Yeah.
He just, like, I would love to just hear Tim Duncan like play back scenes of people trash talking him and what he was thinking. Like, I would give me 10 scenes in Tim Duncan's career and give me unfiltered. I don't know if he curses, but it would be funnier if he did. Like, what was in his mind as he was just staring at him blankly or even smiling? Because Tim did not engage. Like, it was so funny. Like, it almost annoyed you. Like, he just couldn't get at him. Like, he just didn't do it at all. And not saying he never showed emotion, not saying he ever didn't say anything on the court. But when it came to the opponent, nothing. And this is the era of Shaq and KG, who never shut up. Like, I like KG. And I think there is a place for gamesmanship in trash talk world. It could be your thing. But in self-discipline's sake or self-control, not engaging in that is
Mhm.
hilarious.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna run with that on a post somehow. Tim, don't tell him foolery. That's funny. That's a good play on
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
Second section. So we have never twice, losing versus losers, banquets, battles, buff, and break. So let's run into these. Never twice. So this actually came up with Greg McEwen, and the chapter is Can You Get Back Up? So similar to what you're saying, it's not if you fall, it's when.
Mhm.
And you're gonna mess up. So you're gonna have a time where you're at your lowest moment, and you need to be able to get back up. The moment of grace. We need a moment of grace for ourselves. Defeat is not final. Backslides can be stopped. That's the thing about discipline. It never fails us, but sometimes we fail it. I like that. Like we fail discipline, but discipline doesn't fail us. Losing is not always up to us. I wrote the word woe next to this. Losing is not always up to us, but being a loser is. Being a quitter is. Saying, what the heck? Does it even matter? If your standards are so high that you give up when you fall short of them, then you actually don't have high standards. What you have are excuses. Oh, like, we're going to screw up. Later it says, we're all going to relapse on the diet, the bad habit, whatever. We are going to lose. And then what? Falling down 7 times and getting up 8 is what we're after.
Yeah. Yep.
So losing and losers, that's the difference there. Let's go to banquets and battles, and then I'll pass it over to you. So banquets. Let's go to page 151. Remember to conduct yourself in life as if it were a banquet, Epictetus said. As something being passed around comes to you, reach out your hand and take a moderate helping. Does it pass you by? Don't stop it. It hasn't come yet. Don't burn in desire for it, but wait until it arrives in front of you. Act this way with the children, with a spouse, your athletes, toward position with wealth. One day it will make you worthy of a banquet of gods. Churchill said, always remember that I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me. This is a critical test. Don't just think about what a certain pleasure will give, but think about what it will take from you. Think about how what you're chasing is going to age. Temperance, C.S. Lewis says, we go from Epictetus to Churchill to C.S. Lewis. Temperance is going to the right length and no further. I love that. It's very, very interesting. The buff portion, so the strength, the ability to rise from the table before the point of hating yourself, before the meat sweats or the carb coma. This takes strength. Samson couldn't do it. So and I already mentioned about discipline being a punishment, but the last one is the break. Okay. Broke. Wow, I can't read my own writing. Be broke. You can't afford for a moment of ego or excitement costing yourself and your teammates a championship. You can't afford for an impulse decision to undermine your training. You can't afford to let passion block out the calm and mild light. Maybe other people can't, but not you. You can get angry. The important thing is not to do anything out of anger. Slow things down. Think it through. So we have not doing anything twice in terms of if you fall, don't let that happen again. Get back on. Okay. Don't fail your discipline. Not being a loser. The banquet, so kind of that moderation is everything in battles, being strong, and it is not break. It is be broke. Okay. So what do you like out of that for self-control of the mind?
You don't have You don't have high expectations. You have excuses. That's a great quote. I'll bring this back to my realm. We oftentimes think that law and grace are opposite of one another, when in reality, they are both needed to exist. They both need each other to exist. In other words, there is no need for grace if there is no law. What do you need grace from? Right? Or let me put it this way. If there's no expectation, what do you need grace from if you don't meet the expectation? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have expectation, you need grace because you're not always going to meet it. So they're very closely connected to each other. And we need to understand that. So going back to my last story, my last method of self-control, it doesn't mean that I don't have any expectation of a ref, right? I have a high expectation of the ref. Number one, keep the kids safe. Like that's the number. Like you might think that's a low expectation, but no, that's a high expectation, because if you don't meet it, I will come at you.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never had a ref where I felt like, yeah, God, he's letting them shank each other on the field. And it also means that when they don't meet that expectation, like, no, this is what a referee is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about like how they're dressed, or the socks pulled up, or their shirts tucked in, something like that, right? But also, I have a high expectation of how this should be done. So if that's not met, I'm going to go over and talk to them like, hey, and I'm not talking about bias stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, hey, I noticed that, sorry, this is going to be soccer specific, but, you know, when we're trying to make a sub, you're the assistant referee standing next to me, like, you got to notify the center. This is just a basic thing. This isn't a bias, like, hey, I think that judgment call was wrong. That's not what I'm going to talk to them about, right? But fundamentals of how they do their job and how it should be done, I will go talk to them. I've been around long enough. I can speak pretty confidently. I mean, there was one time where we were in a regional game, and the opposing team passed the ball back to the goalie. The goalie picked the ball up. Okay, so for those who don't know soccer, that's whistle blows. That's a free kick, and it should be an indirect free kick where the goalie touched the ball with his hands. Okay, It was a younger kid, definitely cared about what he was doing, definitely wanted to be a good referee. He chose to pick the ball up and move it outside of the box and then put it down for the free kick. Completely wrong. Like, I know the rule. It's completely wrong. This isn't a judgment call. I'm not arguing of whether they kicked the ball back to him purposefully or not. It was, you made the call, but now you're processing in the wrong direction. So as it's going on, I stand up and I don't yell, but I simply throw out the suggestion of, no, the free kick, it's an indirect free kick where the goalie touched the ball. And he just kind of looks over at me and like immediately copped an attitude with me. You could tell, like his face, you could just see it on his face, like, stop talking to me. And so I kind of like left it go, whatever thing went on, happened. Halftime comes. I just walk over to him very peacefully. Like, hey, an indirect free kick. The kick happens when you pass the ball back to the goalie like that, the kick happens where the goalie touches the ball with his hands. Immediate attitude. No, coach, that's not how it goes. No, it is. Go ahead and check the rule book. No, coach, I don't know what leagues you've been a part of, but that's definitely not the case. I'm like, the U.S. Soccer Federation, MLS, the Minnesota State League. Like, I'm just naming every league that I can think of at that point because it's a universal rule. And he's like, yeah, no, coach, no, please go give your halftime talk. We're done here. I'm like, can you just look at the rule book, please? That's all I'm asking. Just look at the rule book. And he just kind of rolls his eyes at me. So I give my halftime talk. I don't actually go approach him again. The teams are running out. As they're running out, I look over to my right, and there he is. And I could just see on his face, man, like, head down. Yeah. Kind of sauntering. Hey, coach, I'm sorry. You're right. I shouldn't. And I was just looking, I was like, yeah, no problem. Just trying to help you out. You're doing good. Appreciate you. And went out, and it was fine. I never said another word to him. So there's still a high expectation to know the rules. Then with grace, that kind of interaction can happen without coming down on anyone and losing control of my emotion. And I'm sorry, I'm harping on the refs, but I think this is the number one situation. If we're talking to coaches here, that is the number one situation where we all lose all mental faculties and just become livid.
Yeah, and that's going to come up in the soul, and you'll see what that looks like. Last set, because this is one we promised in the beginning. So we have the opponent that can contain MJ. We have the Bull Durham respect test, and we have the best test. So these are fun, and pick what you like. The first one is the opponent that contained MJ, and it's under the chapter of temper your ambition. The poet, I'm going to get straight to the punchline. The poet Juvenal remarked that the whole world had not been big enough to contain Alexander, but in the end, a coffin was sufficient. For the opponent, that it'll eventually contain MJ. And I don't wish MJ, I wish MJ a wonderfully long life. Don't get me wrong. Here's why I want to say this. Let me read the rest. There is a pathological need to achieve. Ambition, but of all the addictions in the world, the most intoxicating, the most hardest to control is ambition. Because unlike drinking, society rewards it. We look up to the successful Michael Jordan. We don't ask them what they are doing or why they are doing it. We only ask them how they do it. Marius commanded armies, but ambition commanded Marius. You watch The Last Dance and you tell me that ambition didn't command MJ. Napoleon, Marius, Alexander were powerful, but ultimately powerless. Why? Because they couldn't stop. Because there was never enough. We have to ask, what is this really bringing me? What am I actually getting out of it? What does it profit if you get the whole world but it costs you your soul? Ambition is good, but it just must be tempered. Like all elements of self-discipline, it's about balance. We don't need accomplishments to feel good or to be good enough. What do we need? The truth is not much, according to Ryan. Some food and water, work that we can challenge ourselves with, a calm mind in the midst of adversity, sleep, a solid routine, a cause we're committed to, something, we're getting better at. Everything else is extra. So the opponent that can contain NJ is a coffin. Yeah, the Bull Durham test. Do you remember Bull Durham where he's like, why don't you like me, man? It's like Ebby Calvin Lelouch or whatever the heck his name is, like the young kid with a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. And then you have Kevin Costner playing Crash Davis. And this does matter for self-control, but it's called respect time. The pursuit of discipline means discipline in all things, especially little things. But what I wanted to talk about is this idea of a routine. Routine is an essential tool in the management of time and the suppression of these negative forces of distraction, procrastination, laziness. This is one that I want to see. The person who wakes up whenever, wakes up and does whatever, orders their day around however, this is a person who will never have enough time, who will always be behind. And so I think of like Ebby Calvin, and he's like, dude, I don't respect you because you don't respect yourself. Like, I mean, like he lays it down like a true pro. And I see the Crash Davises of the world, and he looks good. He's like, remember the scene? He's like, you're never gonna make it to the show with like fungus on your shower shoes. It's like, I mean, like it's so funny, like I mean, so that whole movie's great. But it says, take a minute to think about how you spent the last year, the last month, the last week, the last day. Think about how much it was wasted, how much of it was half-assed, how much of it was spent in reaction to things out of your control. There's simply no escaping the fact that these moments are gone forever, that you will never get that time back. You missed opportunities to get better. You missed opportunities to make progress. So we have the coffin, we have time, and then finally is the best test. This is interesting. Under the chapter, do your best. An admiral, there's a situation that says, how did you stand in your class in Naval Academy? This guy's interviewing. He said, sir, I stood 59th in a class of 820. The question responding was, but did you do your best? No, sir, he found himself confessing. I didn't always do my best. Interviewer said, why not? And so it goes on to say, why didn't you do your best? What was holding you back? Why are you so afraid of? Why don't you think this matters? What could you be capable of if you're really committed? If you're not giving your best, why are you giving it at all? Why are you doing it at all? So what you can, so like it goes on and it says, as long as a man is trying as hard as he can to do what he thinks to be right, he is a success regardless of the outcome. That's kind of a John Wooden-esque thing. You can always control whether or not you give your best. No one can stop you from that. What does matter is that you gave everything, because anything less is to cheat the gift. I love that phrase, cheat the gift. The gift of your potential, of your opportunity, of your craft, your responsibility of those entrusted to you, your instruction, the gift of life itself. every performer, according to Hazel Harrison, has an obligation that you must always play your best, even if it's only in the waiting room at the Chiha station, because in this country, there will always be a little man behind the stove who knows the music and the tradition and the standards of musicianship required for whatever you set out to perform. If you haven't heard it lately, your best is good enough. Not perfect, your best. So we have MJ's, the opponent that can contain MJ. We have the Bull Durham respect test, and we have the best test. What hit you hardest?
Well, you said ambition. They were all slaves to ambition. They're all controlled by their ambition, which gets into, well, it made me think of a movie quote. We've quoted Remember the Titans a handful of times. But he's sitting there after Gary Bertier gets into his accident with his wife. And he asked the question, honey, do you think I was blinded by my own ambition? And that didn't hit me till I got well into my 20s, where I listened to that question and go, oh, yeah, I never thought about that. You know, we talk so much, especially around this conversation of self-discipline and discipline. And you highlighted this at the beginning, so much about, it's doing things. You have the discipline to do things. But you also said, do you have the discipline not to do things? Do you have the discipline to not go after something with complete and reckless abandon? That is a real thing. I mean, you talk about MJ, okay, or Kobe, right? There's stories about they're in the gym way before everyone. They're in the gym way after everyone. I just heard Reggie Bush tell a story about Drew Brees, right? Drew, that's actually a good one. So Drew Brees, Reggie tells a story about how, I can get there before the sun comes up. I'm a rookie. I think I'm getting in the building first. I'm this big wig. There's one car in the parking lot. It's Drew Brees. He's already in the film room. He's already, in the second half of a game. And I'm just showing up, thinking I'm the first one there. Yeah. I'm thinking I'm the last one to leave. I just put in a huge weight room session. I look out in the field. There's Drew Brees, no ball in hand, just walking through his motions, his reads, his play calls. I don't even know when he left. I don't know if he ever did leave, right? That's awesome. Drew Brees is one of the best quarterbacks to ever live. It also just came out that Drew Brees has to throw the ball to his kid left-handed because his right shoulder is completely deteriorated from all of the football throwing that he has. Now, I'm not saying I don't know Drew. I don't know if he has regrets in that or not regrets in that. Who knows? Only Drew does. But there is a cost. There's a significant cost in pursuing goals with reckless abandon. It could be relationships with people. That could be quality of life, right? There's a lot of trade-offs in even pursuing excellence with quote-unquote great discipline. I don't know, do we call it over-discipline? Or we call it simply a lack of self-discipline, not knowing when to say, you know what, this is also important. We tend to get in a very mutually exclusive culture. And, we have a tendency to worship only one aspect of a human, and then when we hear another aspect of the human, it rocks our world because we're not seeing them for what they are, which is human, which is a coffin will defeat them at some point. So I think it's worth being said and to think about in our pursuit of excellence and our pursuit of growth. There may be a line of sacrifice, of trade-off that we pass. And do we have the ability to recognize it and stop?
That is a great transition. Like, hold that. So as we move to the soul, there's several things that come up here because I do believe you work, and I love honoring like your gift. Like, don't cheat your gift. Have respect for yourself. Have respect for the craft. That's one thing I wish athletes had more of, or like respect the game. Like when somebody says respect the game, it's like understand that you're not some special thing that you're entitled to. Like there's been a litany of people who put on that jersey or that thing before. Honor that. You know, we don't have a lot of honor in our professional or even college sports to the program. I think you see it sometimes. I think you see it done right. Like you get like an Alabama or the Ohio State. I mean, you see it a little bit, but you see the effects of that. It's like, whoa, like it means something. And without that meaning, it's a thing. So let's move to the soul. And we'll get wrapping up here. We're already long, which is great. I miss seeing Jake for a little bit. First recording of the new 2024 year is the soul. So I know you were curious about this. So the magisterial is what he calls it. Mastering yourself mentally, physically, in command of all ways and all forms, and somehow finding a good gear beyond that. Finding more to give, more to draw from yourself. This is in the greatness we seek. This is where the body, the mind, and the spirit come together in life's most stressful situations, when things don't go our way, in moments of destiny or great difficulty, where we show what all these sacrifices were for, where we show what we're made of, where we prove that is in fact possible to possess the world and keep our soul, which is I think you're getting at. So let's talk about this. I'm gonna go straight to the ones you were doing versus the ones I have down here. So let's talk about the person over profession versus virtues over MVPs, and parties over closing time. So at the end of the book, 282, since you asked what page it was, it's not the office that brings a distinction to the man. It is the man who brings distinction to the office. Kind of the idea of like, if you're a janitor, or I know that gets overused, if you're not in charge, you still can have honor and respect for what you do. Best is the person who adds shine to their accomplishments with their discipline, not the other way around. In the end, it's not about what we do, it's about how we do it, and by extension, who we are. Too often, we find people choosing to be great at their profession over being a great human being. Marcus really said, perfection of character, to live your last day every day without frenzy or sloth or pretense. Conquering the world is almost easy after we have fully conquered ourselves. One thing I'd like everybody to know is that who you are as a person is way more important than who you are as a coach or an athlete. And don't give me the nonsense over those are the same thing. They can be, but not necessarily. Self-discipline has never been about punishment or deprivation. It's about becoming the best you are capable of becoming. Along with that, Jake, so I would say that virtues matter more than MVPs, is knowing when to leave. And I see this a lot, that it's hard to let go of something you've put in a long time. And the chapter is how to make an exit. In that it takes being a bigger man, another level of discipline, to be able to maintain your dignity when you have to go the other way, to live to fight another day. You don't win at everything all the time, not in war, life, or business. A person who doesn't know how to disengage, to cut their losses, or extricate themselves is a vulnerable person. Hope is important, but it's not a strategy. Denial is the same thing as determination. Delusion is destruction. Greed will get you in the end. You have to be as strong enough to take your leave, to know when the jig is up. Key questions. Can you put your ego aside and accept defeat or reconcilable differences? Can you walk away when it's your time, even when it's so tempting not to? So turn out the lights, the party's over, Jake, or the famous song Closing Time. What do you think about person matters over profession, and having the ability to walk away when you hit that ultimatum? Like, are you really going to play one more season at the expense of your family? Are you really going to go after that thing for marginal gains? I wonder about that a lot.
Yeah, it really comes down to a why. It comes down to a purpose. And I would take it back to, it comes down to the audience that you're doing it for. The audience in the stands, the fans in the stands, leave after the game's over. And eventually you're not going to be in that stadium anymore, and they're going to be cheering for somebody else. A spouse, children, mother and father. Those don't come and go with stadiums. All right. And then it comes back to the purpose. Why? You have to answer that question. if you truly want to understand what drives you and why you're being disciplined. It helps you to find the line of too much versus not enough, kind of a deal. It's a tough one for me to answer from a separate point. Truly is. Because then it almost becomes like, what's the point for me? But
good question, though.
It is a good question. What is the point of it all? From that point of view, right? That's not to be dismissive. It's truly to say I don't understand it. For me, there was always a bigger audience than myself. There was a bigger audience than my parents. There's a bigger audience than my family. That I did things for, that drove my behavior, that drove my virtue, that determined where that line was of discipline, of infatuation, I'd even say, with a sport or an activity. So that's my point of view. It's hard for me to understand where you're coming from and what's truly driving you.
Last ones for the soul, and we'll wrap up M&M really quick, and I'll let Jake choose. There's a chapter about being strict with yourself, but tolerant with others. And I like some of the things that were said here, and we'll pair this with the difference between a boss and a leader. So on page 238 in this chapter, it says very simply, and I think I'm on the right page, Cato's great-grandfather, he says, I'm prepared to forgive everybody's mistakes, Cato the elder said, except my own. Ben Franklin said, search others for their virtues, thyself for thy vices, meaning tolerant with others, strict with yourself. Why can't we get people, why can't they, these other people, refs, athletes, other coaches, whatever, can't get such simple things right? Why can't they just do it like we showed them the first time? Why can't they just be like us? Well, because they're not us. And even if they were, is it fair to expect something of them that they never signed up for? Here's a truth. It's not on you to try to change everyone else. Be a strong, inspiring example and let that be enough. Be like Cato, right? Be the Cato. And even then, try to be empathetic. Trying to escape our own faults is hard enough work to keep us busy for a lifetime. I like that. There's a higher plane that we can achieve to when our self-discipline can be complemented by compassion, by kindness, understanding, love. The fruit of temperance should not be loneliness and isolation. That would be a bitter fruit indeed. Superiority is not a weapon you wield on other people. In fact, we have a word for that kind of intemperance: egotism. Pair that with the difference between a boss and a leader. I know most people have probably gotten this one before, but sometimes we just need the reminders and the lessons. It's under carry the load for others. A leader must be selfless. They must sacrifice. They must face the same deprivations as everyone else in the organization. General Viscount Slim said they will follow you to the end. If you can do this, Mattis learned from the writings of General Viscount Slim, they will follow you to the end of the world. And being a boss is a job. Being a leader is something you earn. The leader shows up first and leaves last. The leader works hardest. The leader puts others before themselves. The leader takes the hit. Everything else is just semantics and titles. We have to show, not tell. First in line, show, not tell. Be the first in line for danger, last in line for rewards. First in line for duty, last in line for recognition. To lead, you have to bleed. Now, we can agree or disagree with that, but what do you think about being strict with yourself, tolerant with others, and the difference between a boss and a leader?
I struggle with that first one. It's maybe it's because I don't want to paint myself in a better light than I need to. I don't know if it's because I care about it. I don't know if it's because there's typically kids involved. I really struggle with looking at a lot of youth coaches today. in terms of how they're doing things, how they're conducting themselves. And let me be very clear. I'm not typically judging youth coaches based on how the content that they're coaching, though there is some of that. Most of it is how they are conducting their, not the content, the conduct. That's what is hard for me to bite my tongue on. And so I certainly need to be better about trying to find the virtues in those individuals. But for me, it's very easy to find those vices. And then it's also then easy to look at myself and be, boy, I'm thankful I don't do that. Right? So there's one of my favorite parables. It's Luke. Jesus describes, and this man is a sinner, and he's there confessing his sin, and hey, I'm a murderer, I'm a thief, I'm this and that. And then he goes to the Pharisee, and the Pharisee looks at him and says, boy, I'm thankful I'm not that guy. And the catch is, as you read it, you're reading this, right? And then Jesus goes on to say, who is this person to judge, right? Don't be the Pharisee. We won't want to be judging people, right? Like that. But what you do is you find yourself, you read that, and you get to the end, and you're like, boy, I'm glad I'm not the Pharisee. Like, it's conducted in such a way that the person that it's telling you not to be, it almost reveals that that's who you are as you read it. It's pretty crazy. And I often find myself falling into that trap of, in me judging that person, I become that person. Right? So that one's a tough one for me that I got to be better at for sure.
Well, and that's why when you read Holiday, it's other than the Evolution of Cooperation, which was just a hard technical read, Ego's Enemy is very similar. Where you coming up against truths and you're looking in your own mirror first. You're like, oh, that's a speck. No wonder I can't see. You're like, shoot, and not to self-flagellate here at all. I mean, you just have room for improvement. It's like, oh, that gets me, and I think that's as we go through some of these values. I mean, we are better at some of them than others, right? It's, in Wooden's, pyramid of success, it's like, okay, here's what it takes to achieve that peace of mind at the end. Like that's it. That was his goal. So yeah, obviously changed the scoreboard on us, but here's what it might take. And it's up to us based on our own experiences to look at it. It's like, oh man, I really do need to work on some self-control, specifically my inner domain. That needs some work, right? You're perfect just the way you are, and you could use some work, kind of idea. So I agree with you in that respect. And I just have to think about that one. I haven't really sat with that and how I would respond to others. Like, I'm really good at the whole strict with myself thing.
Yep.
But I tend to expect others to kind of put in the same as I do, and I don't think that's a fair thing. So I resonate with that phrasing of that.
Right.
All right, let's wrap up with three things really quick. I'm going to read our metaphors. There's a lot of metaphors, and I'm not going to read them all to you, Jake, like in terms of the passages. Just tell me the ones that popped up. You're like, hey, I like that one. Try to find at least one, or maybe 2 to 3, just whatever comes to your mind. So what is self-control compared to? What is it like? Metaphorical thinking deepens our understanding of a concept and helps us attach our schema in different ways. So that's just why we do this. So here's some things self-control was described as. There's only 2 that I added on my own. It's described as a crossroads. Cardinal is actually, the word cardinal virtue is actually meant to hinge, like it's hinged upon. So hinge. A compass. Aristotle called it a craft. Later in the book, it's called an e-brake. Character. Self-control is a vehicle. Self-control is Spartan. Lou Gehrig was laughing. He's like, all we ever do is sit on cushions. I don't want to sit on a cushion. Like, forget this. We're all soft. Like, I guess they had cushions in the dugout for the Yankees. It's a training ground. It's an exit ramp. Always take the exit ramp. Kind of like Joseph. Sword play, a magnifying glass, a lifesaver, scoreboard, a budget, key, like a key, like to open up the chains. It's an obligation, mustard seed, way of living, and a lifesaver. So any of those, like, what do you like most of? Would you describe self-control? What stood out to you? What do you think? Ooh, that's how I would describe self-control.
I like key. I think that's a good one. I think self-control, self-discipline can open up a lot of things in life. I would say it's a war. I would say self-discipline is a war, because it's not just like, I'm going to be self-disciplined today. There is always an aspect of you that wants to go against what you should do or what you think you should do. There's this like two voices thing. There's this two laws thing, as Paul puts it, they're going to war inside of you. And which voice are you going to listen to? There's the voice that says, get up and read. There's the voice that says, lay in your bed and scroll a little bit more. So I describe it as a war.
Yeah, I didn't read it because of the time. But in the beginning, right away in the Four Virtues, literally the first couple pages, very similar to like Solomon's dream, where you can give it a choice, but they talk about Hercules, and he's confronted by two goddesses. One is like a life of ease. The other one is a life of hard work and no rewards, promises nothing. And that's where the metaphor of crossroads comes. For Hercules, the choice was between vice and virtue, the easy way and the hard way, the well-trod path and the road less traveled. And I think that's what you're getting at. Just another way to say it.
Yep.
All right, most valuable ideas. I'm just going to give you one, Jake. I mean, I had 7 here. And it is the best. It is, a very positive force. I think we'll just pick one at random and really go with it. But we've covered a lot. Self-control is definitely a thing. I love that we started with something that's all-encompassing, and getting a solid base, because we're going to go into much more specifics as I'm going to describe later. But the one I want to go is just the simplest one at the end. Is self-control is not a life sentence. It's just a way of living. I mean, operating against the grain is not a punishment. It is something that you can do to see how good can you actually get. And by having, I think a lot of times is we have the thing that, I'm going to be, I'm not going to be allowed to do what I do, but by forcing positive, creative, self-discipline constraints on us, we're free to do more. So yes, it is a key, but it's kind of a paradoxical key, right? And it's on that sense. Anything, I mean, we covered a lot from body, mind, spirit. Any other main ideas that you want to share before we give a really brief daily challenge and a eulogy, and then we'll tell them what's coming up next?
I would say that they're all connected. That true self-discipline, all three, not only have to be disciplined, but they have to be disciplined on the same page. Because if they're not, they fight against each other all the time. And when you find synchronicity between the three, that is when true self-discipline comes. And I think that's when you see it in its fullest potential, or you achieve, ultimately, I would say, your fullest potential when those three are connected on the same page and working together.
I would agree with that. Well said. All right, your last things to wrap up, and we need to get moving on, is a daily challenge and a eulogy. I like this kind of contrast between right now and at the very end. So fun contrast. Your daily challenge. Self-control daily challenge for your 3 topics. Pick one, pick them all, like Jake said. It's a daily challenge we face, not once, but constantly, repeatedly. Will we be selfish or selfless? Brave or afraid? Strong or weak? Wise or stupid? Will we cultivate a good habit or a bad one? Courage or cowardice? The bliss of ignorance or the challenge of a new idea? Stay the same or grow? The easy way or the right way? So the daily challenges, pick a time frame, 7, 14, 31. Which way did you choose? And just see. Maybe you were leaning a little bit. It could be a spectrum, but maybe take those 3 and say, which one did I do? Really good thing just to keep front of mind. I know it's the kind of new year. Everybody's doing all those goals and resolutions, but think of this like an athlete version or coach version. Assess yourself daily, weekly. See how that could go. It's a good daily challenge. The other one is the Cato, be a Cato. And it comes from Gehrig's eulogy. This is so interesting. Jake, I'll say this. From 0 to 60, how long do you think Lou Gehrig's funeral lasted?
Are you talking minutes?
Minutes,
hours?
Yep. 0 to 60.
60.
8.
Okay.
The funeral lasted 8 minutes. Looking out over the man's friends and teammates, the priest found a flowery eulogy unnecessary. He said, "We need none," the preacher said to the man, "because you all knew him. No tribute was needed. His life, his example spoke for himself." Lou Gehrig, each of us, like Lou Gehrig, each of us is in a battle with our physical form. First, to master it and bring it to its full potential. Second, as we age or get sick, to arrest its decline, to quite literally wrest the life from it while we can. The body must understand as a metaphor. It's a training ground, a proving ground for the mind and soul. And so what I want to is pick somebody, like what we did at the beginning. Pick somebody inspired. Be a Cato. You be that thing so that you need a funeral that only lasts 8 minutes. We don't need to do this. You all knew it. So I don't care what the it is or the who it is necessarily, but that there is an it and a who. And let that be your eulogy. It's because I know that's a very famous exercise, like write your epitaph and things like that. But that would be the two that I would say is do that self-control daily challenge and write that eulogy. Be the Cato. All right, everybody, thank you for hanging in there with us. Jake, I think we broke a new record based on my estimations of longest episode ever.
I think you're right. I think we got
not the one I was expecting, but it is good. But thank you for listening in. Thank you for learning with us. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share with somebody that they would need a little bit of self-control, whether it's body, mind, temperament. Be tolerant with them, please. Maybe strict with yourself in that regard. Send that nicely. We are in the first. This was the first on self-control. We are going to be moving on to specifically emotional control with Mark Manson's subtle art. Jake and I got to figure out how we're going to deal with the F-bombs that come from the book. Probably don't want to be espousing the F-bomb left and right. But we will be moving to that because we got to talk about, how many Fs do you really give and the self-control it takes to choose. And Mark Manson's advice, while maybe a little bit outside of Jake's and I realm, gives us really good food for thought in terms of what we can actually control. So be on the lookout for that. That'll be the second in our series before we move on to some other ones. Jake, final word?
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. Good to see you again. We'll talk to everyone next time.
See ya.